to our forum on gun violence. As many of you know, our community has been tragically touched by gun violence the last few years. 2 years ago, Detective Vicki Armel and Master Police Officer Michael Garbarino were killed down the street at the Sully District Police Station. Last year, 2 of our graduates from the class of 2005, Rima Samaha and Aaron Peterson, were gunned down in their French class at Norris Hall at Virginia Tech last April. I cannot begin to tell this audience how the impact of the death of these children, these beautiful, talented young ladies, have had on their family, their friends, and their neighbors. The anguish and grief of these families have been heartbreaking for all of us. Our young people have been especially affected. Many of them struggle to this day to figure out why their friends died so young and so violently. They try to express their grief in song, poetry, dance, and art, and we, their parents, have no answers. This forum is an attempt to answer those questions and to ask. In response to his daughter's death, Joe Samaha created and founded the Angel Fund, a fund to educate Virginia citizens about gun policies and legislation here in the state of Virginia, and to advocate for common sense gun laws. This panel discussion falls within the mission of the Angel Fund to educate, as it does within the mission of the PTA and the Westfield Coalition, a grassroots organization under the umbrella of the Safe and Drug-Free Coalition. We would like to therefore thank the Westfield High School PTSA and the Westfield Coalition for co-sponsoring this event with the Angel Fund. I would like to introduce our speakers, starting at first here on the right to your left, Joe Samaha. Joe and his wife Mona and their 2 children, Omar and Rhonda, had lived in Centerville for over 20 years. As a result of their terrible loss, Joe wanted to educate others about gun laws and advocate for changes to improve our public safety so that no family suffers as his has. Next to Joe is Andy Goddard, who drove up from Richmond tonight. We thank him for that. Andy is the father of Colin Goddard, who was wounded in the same classroom as Aaron and Rima. As a result of his experience, he became the president of the Richmond chapter of the Million Mile March. Next to him is Master Police Officer Luis Munoz, a familiar face to our students. He is our school resource officer here at Westfield High School and is here to answer any questions you may have. Next to him is Sergeant Bill Fulton, supervisor of the school resource officers at the Sully District Police Station, and who has worked for many years with our youth, also here to answer questions you may have. Next to him is Dr. Roger Depew, founder and chairman of the board of the Academy Group, a forensic behavioral consulting firm specializing in analysis of aberrant behavior. A former FBI agent, Dr. Depew was promoted to chief of behavioral sciences and in 1984 became the first administrator of the FBI National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. Dr. Depew was appointed by Governor Kane to serve on the Virginia Tech panel and has been consulted on cases such as the shootings at Columbine. Last is Jim Salo, Vice President of the Virginia Center for Public Safety, who will brief us on the gun legislation that passed and failed in the Virginia legislature this session. There are handouts in the back if you did not get them when you came in. Please help yourself on your way out. The format of the evening will be as follows. Our panelists will all speak first. When they are done, then there will be questions and answers from the audience. So that we can accommodate everyone, we ask that you only ask one question unless we do have time. And we also ask that everyone listens to everyone and treats the panelists and the questioners with respect. So I will now hand it over to Joe Samaha.
Thank you, Luann, and thank the Westfield High School PTSA and Westfield Coalition for co-sponsoring this educational forum this evening. I would like to also thank our distinguished guests and you, the members of our community, for being here tonight as well. As founders of the Angel Fund, our daughter Rima being our personal angel and guardian, my wife Mona and I have been compelled to make sure that others learn from our tragedy so that, God forbid, they don't have to relive what we're going through. As Luann stated, it's not just the direct impact we and other VT families personally deal with, but one that continues to ripple throughout our community and our state. Our tragedy at Virginia Tech involved much more than the issue of guns. but intimately involved during his service on the VT panel. Dr. Depew will concur that the scope of the issues at VT were really the failure of institutions, law, and men. But we must not fail to connect the dots, because if we do fail to connect the dots, we're doomed to relive our history. And we unfortunately will continue to live the Sully District Police Station, Columbine, Appalachian State, College of Law, Virginia Tech, the Omaha Mall, the Colorado Church, the Louisiana Tech, Kirkwood, Missouri, and most recently Northern Illinois University, and on and on and on. Many of the factors of these tragedies are common to each other. The topics we hope to bring forward to discuss tonight and in future forums will touch upon issues we directly confronted in the scope of our VT experience. And those issues are school and mental health, privacy laws, HIPAA and FERPA, the understanding of those laws, the white and black merging into gray and people not really understanding them, high schools and universities, the greater safety and security in our schools and campuses. It's no longer the campus tour and understanding where the blue light is when we need the police. It's no longer the police officer on campus telling families that we're here to escort their children. It's gone beyond that. We need more than that. It's more than text message you need. Gun law issues in Virginia are also to be discussed, and that means striking a reasonable balance between public safety and the rights of gun owners. How to make it harder for those that should not have guns to get them. Our Angel Rima was such a creative and giving and inclusive person. We know that Rima would want to fix things, fix the wrongs that we discovered. We are here on earth to continue that legacy. It will take patience, it will take dialogue, it will take understanding, and most important, it will take education. To make sense and reason, and that will change and benefit, and that is all for the greater public safety. And Angel will continue to do that. The Angel Fund's mission will continue to do that in Rima's name and the name of all the children that were lost on April 16th. Thank you.
Next is Andy Goddard.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Goddard. My son Colin was in the same room as Rima and several others. I have a slightly different experience because my son's still alive, so I haven't been to the same depths as Joe and many of the other families, but I'd like to remind people that gun tragedies don't always involve just deaths. There are many people who survive gun injuries and their lives are incalculably altered by that experience. On April the 14th and 15th, I was just an ordinary American like you, although I don't sound like an ordinary American. A little concerned about what I'd heard about guns and a little concerned about safety, but it wasn't at the front of my mind. I'm never expected to be sitting on the stage talking to people. I'm not a public speaker. I didn't anticipate taking up a cause for any particular purpose, but having witnessed my son's injuries and his recovery, I've had a lot of time to think about the situation, and I decided that I couldn't just sit back, having suffered this the way our family has suffered and the way my son has suffered, and do nothing about it. I've done a lot of studying to try and find out, and I found out that I knew absolutely nothing. And I think that's the normal. I think it's in our lives we don't know about gun laws. We anticipate that there are a lot of gun laws out there protecting us. We anticipate that there are a lot of things which, when you come to look for them, actually it's just smoke and mirrors. There really are not very many good protections out there. And of course it's an extremely polarizing subject. As soon as you mention anything to do with guns and law, you have people immediately turn you around and say, well, you're a gun hater, so you're a gun grabber. You're out there to take away my constitutional rights. Well, I decided that I was going to do something about this and find out where the middle ground was. I wanted to join an organization that would talk about the middle ground. How can we compromise? How can we come to a solution which is passable by both people who like guns and people who are afraid of guns? And I ended up joining the Million Moms March because I found out that actually, after having gone to their meetings, as a somewhat of a skeptic, thinking, you know, I don't really want to talk to fanatics on either side of this issue, I was very surprised to find that actually they're not fanatical. And I'm going to let you in on an insider secret, that there are many organizations out there that call themselves gun safety organizations. Used to call themselves gun control organizations, but that became a little bit too controversial. So now they're gun safety organizations. And to be honest, I am still looking for the person in one of those organizations that wants to take away a gun. I will add one small caveat, and I myself feel the same way about this, and that is with assault weapons. I haven't found a decent reason yet why a private individual needs to have an assault weapon. If somebody could convince me, then I might change my mind about thinking that they should not be generally for sale. I don't think you should need a 50 caliber sniper rifle if you're just a general non-commissioned military person serving in Iraq. I don't know what a sniper rifle can do for you in private life in the US, except kill somebody at a mile range that you can't even see their face. So I would like to take those guns away. But I want to tell you the secret is that you don't have to hate guns to be a gun safety advocate, and you don't have to want to disarm a single law-abiding American citizen. And I don't want to do that. I don't agree exactly with the interpretation that some people put on the Second Amendment, but that's another story. I think you have to read the whole sentence, and you have to look at what was being meant when the amendment was written. What was going through those people's minds when they wrote those things down? What was the history? What was the circumstances? I think if a group of like-minded people sat down today to write amendments to the Constitution, they would write an entirely different set of amendments based upon the fears and the problems that they're having today, which is what they did in those days. They're not the same necessarily. The principles are the same, but the actual fears about having people quartered in your house at times when there's no war, that was a big thing in those days. It's not a big thing now. We have to think beyond the actual words that they wrote down and think, what were they trying to do to protect American people? And then we need to come up with some things that will protect us again today.
Thank you, Andy. Jim Salo.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on at the Virginia General Assembly in Richmond, especially with regard to firearms regulations. As a result of the shootings at Virginia Tech, a number of folks, a number of organizations met with Joe Samaha, some of the other victims, families, and got behind a piece of legislation, SB 109, which was introduced by Senator Marsh. It's a bill to require everybody who goes to a gun show to undergo a background check. We thought that would be an important step, an important public safety step. Colonel Massengill, who headed up the Virginia Tech review panel, testified for us with regard to that bill. A number of people from the administration. Joe Samaha testified for us with that bill, as well as a number of other victims. That bill failed 9-6 in the Courts of Justice Committee. There were 3 other bills introduced regarding trying to get weapons onto campus or trying to prevent schools from being able to regulate weapons on campus. All of those bills were left in committee. That is, they will not be heard this year, so those bills are effectively dead. There are 2 bills that we think that the public should generally be interested in regarding weapons. There's SB 436, a bill introduced by Senator Vogel, who is up in the Winchester area. She has a bill which would allow people to carry guns in cars in their glove compartment without getting a concealed weapons permit. Apparently the theory is that when you live up in Winchester, it's a very dangerous drive from up there to Richmond. A lot of highwaymen out on the highways. So you may need a gun in your car. And so Senator Vogel introduced that bill, and that bill passed the Senate and is now going to be heard in the House. There's also the Guns in Bars bill. Right now you can carry your gun openly into a bar, but you can't carry a concealed gun into a bar. The theory being that guns and alcohol just doesn't mix. But Senator Hanger had a better idea. He thought, if you're watching the Redskins on TV in a sports bar or something, and somebody gives you a hard time, you might want to pull out your gun. So SB 476 passed the Senate and is now before the House. So those are the major bills on guns that's basically the status of them.
Thank you, Jim. Our projector still, I don't think is working, but Dr. DePue would like to start. Sure.
Good evening. Thank you. It's great to see you all here. I once spoke to a prison population and I started that way. It's great to see you all here. They didn't laugh. Oh, wow, it looks like we're going to have the slides. Great. What I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to talk a little bit about school shooting and school violence and the role that fantasy plays in violence, and especially in school violence. And so the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about Columbine. As you heard in the introduction from Luann, I was an expert witness in the Columbine case. So, excuse me, I'm familiar with that case, and I think that it has lessons for us all. And since this is a high school and we are in a high school environment, I think it would be worthwhile to talk about one of these mass shootings that occurred in a high school, Columbine. And then after that, I'm going to do a brief discussion of Virginia Tech. And see if there were any lessons that were learned in Columbine that should have been, in the 8 intervening years, learned by other schools. And then we'll talk a little bit about fantasy, maybe define fantasy, talk about the role of fantasy in human behavior, and especially the role of fantasy in violent behavior. And we'll finish up by talking about some warning signs. By the way, there are handout materials on both warning signs, red flags, indicators of behavior which suggest that there may be violent fantasy in the mind of the would-be perpetrator. So we'll talk about warning signs, and then we'll finish up talking a little bit about what we might do to get a little better, realizing that there are some roadblocks. There are some difficulties in transferring, in sharing information, and we need to share information. As you heard, my background is law enforcement. I was the chief of police in Michigan. I went into the FBI, I had a career in the FBI, and now I have a company called the Academy Group, a forensic behavioral science company. So my approach will be a little different than the other members of the panel. It will be a behavioral science perspective of what's going on in these multiple victim shooting situations, and perhaps what's going on in the minds of the perpetrators. So with that, let's begin. And I don't have a clicker or anything here, so maybe I can just ask someone to either give me a clicker or be my clicker. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we're going to talk about two school shootings here at Columbine High School, which was April 20th, 1989, and then briefly talk about Virginia Tech University, April 16th, 2007. So as I said, the Columbine High School, my involvement in the case was that it was a civil case, and our company was hired, and I was selected particularly to be a consultant and an expert witness for the defense in that case. As you know, there were lawsuits against the school and against the law enforcement agencies and just about everyone else involved in that situation. And so I was asked to analyze the situation, travel to Littleton, Colorado, walk the halls of Columbine High School, and form an opinion about what happened there and perhaps the culpability of the players. So to begin with, Columbine High School multiple victim shooting can only be described as an armed assault. As you know, there were two shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Cleveland. Eric was 18 years of age, Dylan was 17 years of age. They were both seniors. They would be considered relatively normal in most school situations. Harris had been accepted to the University of Arizona, and had he completed his senior year, would probably have begun his freshman year at the University of Arizona. Cleveland was interested in joining the Marine Corps, and he was turned down because he was undergoing some psychiatric or psychological counseling, and was taking medications for that. I have a photograph of these two young men, and you can see that they look relatively normal, as most young people do. It's almost hard to believe when you look at these photographs that they went on this rampage where they went through the school and just indiscriminately shot whoever was visible. And then, as a matter of fact, went into the cafeteria and eventually into the library, and even made sport of shooting the victims. Unlike some of the other multiple victim shooters who act alone, these two kind of played off of one another and even taunted their victims and laughed at them. And when students were trying to hide under chairs and tables, they would bend over and look at them and say peekaboo and things like that before they killed them. So we're talking about two young people who look like they're normal and acted relatively normal. And as with most of these shooting situations, everyone said after Columbine occurred that you couldn't see it coming. There were really no warning signs. And then when you begin to look at it in depth, you begin to see warning signs popping up, more and more warning signs, and all kinds of indicators that should cause people to be aware and alert and to take some kind of action. So let me give you a little timeline of what happened. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the school itself. As you can see, it's a large complex. It's 250,000 square feet. I don't know what this complex size is. It's probably larger than that. But 250,000 square feet is a large school. It has 25 doors. And the reason that I mention these things is because you can't take the terminology of a high school and apply it to a university. Now, I hear people talking about locking down the university. if you take a university like Virginia Tech or Northern Illinois University, and you're talking about 30,000 students and 5,000 or 6,000 other people, faculty and staff on the campus. Virginia Tech had 131 major buildings, 131, 2,500 acres. The concept of lockdown for me is not a good one. You can lock down Columbine High School. You can probably lock down this school. But even locking down a school like this would be a difficult thing to do with all the students that you have here and people coming and going and that kind of thing. So it's a very difficult thing to do. So I'm going to suggest that we get our terminology right at the beginning. To say that we can lock down a university is inappropriate language. We cannot lock down a university. We can't lock down a city of 35,000 people. Now, there are certain buildings that we can lock down, certainly, within the university, but extremely difficult thing to do. So I suggest when I speak to groups that we not use a concept like lockdown for an environment as huge as some of these major universities are. It gives the public a concept that we can do something that we can't do. Okay, so when we look at the timeline, we can see that Harrison people prepared very thoroughly for this shooting situation. That they had prepared and rehearsed for a year prior to the shooting. They had accumulated weapons. They had a Tech-9 semi-automatic pistol and a carbine, rifles and shotguns and handguns. And they had been out practicing. They even videotaped themselves in action. And they had been experimenting with explosives and bombs. And as a matter of fact, they had detonated a bomb just close to one of the homes, Harris's home, and the police were called. And so there was something going on with these two young men that became more and more visible to the parents, because the parents Harris's father was actually out in the field and exploded a bomb with his son. So people were aware, and the other students, the peers, were aware that these two guys were into guns and explosives, and even their language, and even their dress. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about fantasy a little bit. That you can tell a great deal about a person, the fantasy that the person has, by a number of things. Not only their verbal behavior and nonverbal behavior, but their possessions and their interests and their grooming. And a lot of things give us clues. Now, any one of those things is not enough to make a judgment about someone. No, it's certainly not. But it is a flag, and a flag should get our attention. When you see a flag, you should look in that direction. And then you should see if there are other warning signs, other indicators. And I'm not sure that that's being done as efficiently as we could do it. So these two fellows decided that they would have a diversion. So they took a bomb out about a mile away, and they exploded that in the field. And they thought the police would go there. And then simultaneously they would attack the school. Now, when they went to the school, they parked their cars in two different parking places, as you saw in the first slide of the school. One parked in the faculty parking lot, the other parked in the student parking lot. And then they had duffel bags, and they carried their 20-pound bombs into the school cafeteria. And the first lunch group was in the cafeteria. 488 students were in the cafeteria. They brought these 20-pound propane bombs. They put them in the cafeteria, and they had timers on them so that they would explode in about 10 minutes. And then they left the cafeteria and they went back to their cars to wait for the bombs to explode. Had those bombs detonated, they would have killed all 488 students in the cafeteria. 2 20-pound propane bombs. It is a tremendous fire burst and would have probably killed everybody in there. Fortunately, the bombs did not detonate. And then Harrison-Klebold donned their black trench coats, picked up their various weapons, put them underneath the trench coats, walked to the school, and by the time they got to the school, they began to open fire on students outside of the school. Whereupon the school resource officer, who was in his patrol car on the other side of the campus, was called, the police department was called, and the school resource officer responded. So you can see the time element here that the school resource officer got there almost immediately. As soon as he got there, he was engaged in a firefight with Harrison-Klebold, and so he called for assistance, and it was only a few minutes before SWAT arrived. In the meantime, Harrison-Klebold are inside the school, in the cafeteria. People are running frantically to get out of the cafeteria. And they began to shoot indiscriminately. And they walk through the halls and they shoot. And eventually they get to the library. And when in the library, they go through the library and begin to shoot the students. They, in the meantime, took off their black trench coats and threw them away and just armed themselves. They also had backpacks where they had about 90 bombs, pipe bombs, and various kinds of bombs. And they would, as they went through the school, they would throw these bombs in various rooms. Sometimes they detonated, sometimes they did not. So if you can imagine what's going on in that school at this time, once a bomb detonates, the sprinkling system comes on, the warning sirens and bells are going off, there's smoke in the halls, there's chaos. And now when SWAT arrives, there are other shooters that are reported. And actually, there were no other shooters, but that always happens to the police when they arrive at a situation like this. Someone sees someone in a black trench coat on the other side of campus, and then they think they have a member of the gang over there. There was a man working on the roof at Columbine on the air conditioning system, so they thought they had a sniper on the roof, and it's just a very chaotic situation. Then SWAT, by the time SWAT assembled and prepared to enter, the shooting was over. We're only talking about 16 minutes. In 16 minutes, Harrison-Klebold killed 12 of their students and one faculty member, and wounded many others, and then shortly after took their own lives in the library. But in the library, I just want to bring to your attention the fact that for them, this was sport, and they were laughing, and they were shooting people, and they were mocking the athletes, and saying things like, "You're not so tough now, are you?" Or, that kind of thing. And there's a photograph there taken by the school video camera showing Harrison-Klebold in the cafeteria, because when the bombs didn't explode and when they went through the school and they had time, they went back to the cafeteria and they tried to explode the bombs again. They shot at them with their weapons, and they tried to get them to explode, and they couldn't get them to explode. They were so casual that one of them picked up a drink that was on one of the tables, and took a drink out of it that had been left by students departing the scene. Here we have a real cold-blooded kind of thing. Again, the police response was SWAT, and I was a member of the first FBI SWAT team, Spider 1. And I'm a former firearms instructor. I understand firearms and I understand tactics. And I understand the way we were taught back in those days. That was 1973 that I was on a SWAT team for the FBI, the first SWAT team. And we were taught that when you go through a building that you clear every room, because you don't want to go past shooters and have them come up behind you and shoot you from the back. So you clear each room methodically, one at a time. Well, it takes a great deal of time to do this, and as you saw in the timeline there, by the time SWAT got to the library, it was hours. And probably the single most important lesson that we learned at Columbine was that SWAT is an inappropriate response to an active shooter situation. And that means that now every officer on a police department, every officer has to be trained to attack an active shooter, excuse me, because you can't wait for SWAT to get there. And so it's a massive undertaking, and it's very dangerous because you can't, you don't have the time to clear every room. And so it is possible that you're going to be attacked by other shooters who are concealed. But the philosophy is you must go directly to the shooter and neutralize him. And that means kill him. Go directly to the shooter, go directly to the person who's executing these innocent people and kill them. And that's what most sophisticated police departments are doing now. We certainly have school resource officers in our schools, yes. But when a situation like this occurs, the first 2 or 3 officers that arrive on the scene are instructed to form a team and to get in there and take that shooter out. It's high risk. We may lose some officers, but I teach school resource officers for the state of Virginia, and I tell them, it's dangerous. It's not an easy job. Lou Munoz, a great guy, a good friend of my son who's a police officer here in Fairfax County. But this is a serious job, and I tell school resource officers, this is not officer friendly, where you hold up your badge and your handcuffs, and you tell the kiddies what it's all about, what police work is all about. No, this is real police work in a community, and you have to have your finger on the pulse at all times, and you have to be picking up on these warning signs, and you have to be a resource to the community. So I tell them when I teach school resource officers that if you don't think that you can shoot a 10th grader who's shooting faculty and students, then leave right now. Go sell insurance. Deliver milk at 7-Eleven. But if you want to be a police officer, you have to be a police officer in an environment like this, because we're living in dangerous times as far as multiple victims shootings are concerned. So, lessons learned, SWAT's not an appropriate response. What is active shooter? That's where it is now. All schools, all police departments, and especially all universities that have law enforcement agencies on their campuses must complete this sophisticated training of how to attack an active shooter and neutralize it as soon as possible. Okay, so now we talk about Virginia Tech. Well, we can go back to that one. I guess we can. I was going to just say a few things about the weapons. I've already described the weapons to some extent. Rehearsal, I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that they rehearsed this for a year, or perhaps more. That they had websites, and on those websites they said a lot of things people I don't like, I waste, and all kinds of things like that. Now, I raise children, and I realize that the kids say a lot of crazy things. And if you're a teacher, you hear a lot of crazy things, and you hear the kids, their imagination is running wild, and they write crazy stories and all that. But I'm suggesting that some of them, at least some of them, are a high-risk population. We have to learn more how to identify those people and have successful intervention. Fantasy and leakage. Now, fantasy, we'll talk about a little bit down the line, but I just want to acquaint you with the concept of leakage, and that is when a person has a fantasy, a very intense fantasy, that it will seep out of it. As a forensic behavioral scientist, I know this. I work with Fortune 500 companies for problems in the workplace, anything between mischief and murder, and all things in between. And people who have strange fantasies will, the more they think about them, the closer they move to acting them out. And these fantasies, if they're intense, they'll seep out of you. They'll leak out of you. Even healthy fantasies will leak out of you. Anytime a person intensely believes in something or feels very strongly about something, you don't have to be around them very long before it kind of seeps out, it kind of leaks out. If a person is prejudiced against blacks, or prejudiced against Hispanics, or prejudiced against Arabs, or whatever it could be, all you have to do is be around that person for a certain period of time and have some interaction with them, and these attitudes begin to become aware, become visible to you. And the same thing is true when a person is harboring dangerous ones, that they will betray themselves in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about those. And those things translate into warning signs. Okay, let's, now some of the other lessons that were learned in Columbine were the fact that the police were aware of these two fellows, Harrison Cleveland. They were both on probation at the time when they committed this crime for burglary of a vehicle. They were both in counseling at this time, psychological counseling. They had threatened the lives of a young boy by the name of Brown. They had attacked his house with paintballs. They had threatened to kill his mother. They had a website where they listed the names of people that they would like to kill. And so there were a lot of warning signs. And so here you had the police, you had the judicial system, the courts, who had these kids on probation. You had parents who were obviously aware that these kids had tremendous interest in weapons and explosives and weird websites. You had students, fellow students, you had peers, you had some of the kids who were older buying the guns for the ones who were too young to buy them for themselves. These guns were actually being purchased by some of their older friends. And so, and the kids in school, the kids in school are probably one of our best resources. They know who's weird, You're entitled. Boy, this guy's a weird one. Well, man, we should just take a look. Not brand him or anything, but at least take a look and see what is this weirdness. What is it composed of? Are there some warning signs of danger there? So you had many people, many agencies had information. The information was not shared, it was not consolidated, there was no action plan to deal with kids that were acting out in this variety of ways. So now let's just talk about Virginia Tech briefly. My involvement, as you heard, was a member of the governor's panel to review the tragedy. And by the way, this is what the Virginia Tech panel report looks like. And, I have it here. Anybody wants to take a look at it can do that. It's on the web. The entire report, 147 pages, is on the web, and all you have to do is do a VT panel report, and you can get the entire report. There's good stuff in this report. Excuse me. It's my belief that we had an excellent panel. I was very impressed with the other members of the panel, and we wrote a good report. And it's got some good stuff in here. It's got about 92 recommendations and numerous findings in this thing. And we reviewed other school shootings as well. And because of the membership of the panel, we were able to look at it from a variety of perspectives, not only the academic perspective, but also mental health and law enforcement. And my job on the panel was to go into Virginia Tech and take a look at their emergency response plan. Every institution of any size ought to have an emergency response plan. And it ought to be up to date, and it ought to define the roles of the various players and be of value when a crisis occurs, so that you have the phone numbers right at your fingertips and directions for what people ought to do in those circumstances. So that was one of my responsibilities. And I read the plan. The second one was to look at the police action, to see if the police action was appropriate, as it did at Columbine. And the third one was to look at children, the personality of children. When I was chief of behavioral sciences and when I worked with the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit, one of my jobs was to construct profiles of unknown killers. You all see Criminal Minds and all of those profiling programs on television all the time. We were involved in the real thing. And there's a great deal that can be done in that regard, looking at the kinds of people who do these things and perhaps working out something of predictive value. So now we take a look at the campus, and as you can see, it's quite different than Columbine, which is a single building. Here we see Amber Johnson Hall in the forefront there, and then there's Harper Hall, and that's where Cho lived in relation to Amber Johnson Hall. Amber Johnson Hall was the hall where the first two victims were killed. Emily Hilscher and Ryan, the resident advisor for that part of Amber Hall. And then Norris Hall in the background there, across the parade field. So you can see that this is a huge complex, and that the shooter went from one place, Amber Hall, to Norris Hall in that period of time. In this instance, as you know, the media covered it quite well. But Cho first went to Amber Johnson Hall. I had the tour. When something like this happens, and you're on a panel, you get the tour. The police take you through and they show you where everything happened. Well, if you're an old investigator, the tour, is nice, but it's not enough, because you want to go back and you want to go through that place alone by yourself. You want to walk through those halls and you want to piece it together. You want to try to figure out what he did and how he did it, and how he got up on the fourth floor, and why did he spot Emily Hilscher. Emily Hilscher is one of our neighbors. She lives in Woodville, right down from Boston. Joan and I live in Boston, Virginia. By the way, I didn't introduce my wife. She's right here in the front row. She must be my biggest fan. Why don't you stand up and let these folks see her? The reason that I'm showing her so much attention is because we are co-authors of one of the handouts in the back. It's called To Dream, Perchance to Kill. And we may not get the opportunity to talk about fantasy in great detail in the film, but that handout will do that for you. It will discuss fantasy And Joan is a clinical psychologist, and she worked with me through the entire article. She was a great contributor to constructive fantasy, and of course my area was the destructive kind of fantasy. So we made a good team on writing that. All right, but here's the campus, and so Cho somehow follows Emily Hosher up to her room, and her room is located immediately behind the elevator bank. And gosh, she goes in her room, he goes in her room after her, she may have screamed or something. The resident advisor is in the room immediately next to hers. He comes running over there. Boom, he gets shot. And then Emily gets shot. And Cho is able to get out of the building, apparently with no scene. And then he, as you know, goes back to his hall, to his room, and gets his manifesto and his photographs in his package for NBC News, and takes it over to the post office, mails it, then comes back, arms himself again, gets ready, and goes to Norris Hall, where he begins to commit mass murder of 30 students in that building on the second floor, going from room to room, and just executing people at what appears indiscriminately and at random, as well as professors. He ends his shooting spree by taking his own life as well. This photograph was taken from his student ID card, so and you can see the years that he was enrolled. He was a senior at Virginia Tech, about to graduate, and when this thing happened. If you take a look at this case, you see that as opposed to a SWAT response, this situation required an active shooter police response. And Chief Flincham of the Virginia Tech Police Department had trained every one of his officers in active shooter response. He had worked with the Blacksburg City Police Department, and they joined in training teams. In fact, just 1 month before this shooting took place, they had a practical exercise where they had a hypothetical shooter, and they attacked the shooter. So this chief was really on top of his game. He had the training, and he had his people that had gone through the sophisticated training, and I was impressed with the rapid response and their involvement. And it was my opinion that a lot of lives were saved because of this immediate response of the police. Now, Cho, as you know, had chained the doors. It is not the first time that I've seen this kind of thing happen. I've seen students who have fantasized about chaining the doors. One in Oklahoma where the shooter was saying that Harrison Cleveland made a mistake. They should have chained the doors, and when everybody was running out, then they couldn't get out, and then they could have killed far more people. This student said, if I were to do this, I would have chained the doors, and then when they were all in the lobby, I could have just shot them like shooting fish in the barrel. He said, that's pretty advanced fantasy. The school resource officer came up to me after I was speaking, and he said, you want to read this composition? You see, the English teacher asked her students to write about their impression of what happened in Columbine, and that was his essay. His essay was, they didn't do it right. There are a lot of things that they could have done. They could have started fires and bombs around the school, and then when everybody ran down to the lobby, they couldn't get out because the doors would be chained, and then I could just shoot them easily. So that's, the school resource officer said, what do you think? I think you better snatch this guy and get him out of the school. And have someone like my wife Joan look in his ear to see what the hell is going on. These kind of fantasies are present in some of our young people, and we have to identify them. So the response was appropriate. Unfortunately, the bad guy, the perpetrator, has the edge always in suicide kind of shooting, where he attacks innocent victims. Now, if we take a look at the weapons that Cho used, as you know, he had a Glock 9mm semi-automatic pistol with a 15-round magazine. And then he had a P-22, a 22 caliber pistol with a 10-round magazine. He had many magazines, extra magazines. He had a vest, you may have seen it on television, where he could hold many different magazines in the vest. He had a backpack where he had a hammer and a knife, as you'll see in just a moment. And he had also rehearsed. As a matter of fact, we found that a couple of weeks before this situation occurred at Virginia Tech, a student found a door chain in North Hall, and never mentioned it. And then the chain was gone in a short time. Another student said that they saw an Oriental male with a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled around his face so you couldn't distinguish his features very well, about the same time. So it appears that Cho had gone there and chained doors and practiced and thought the thing through. I mentioned that I thought that the class police response saved a lot of lives, and the reason for that was because when the police tried to enter the Norris Hall and the doors were chained and they couldn't get in, they tried to shoot the locks, the chains, could not shoot them, went to a maintenance room that had a different kind of a lock that was locked, and they shot that door open. And then they immediately went up to the second floor. The shooting was still going on. And when they got to the top of the second floor, I believe that Cho probably heard the shotgun blast downstairs and knew that they were on the way up, and then took his own life. By the time they got to the second floor, the shooting stopped. And, it was at that point that Cho had taken his rifle and had more than 200 rounds still on him in loaded magazines, and probably planned to kill many more. I just want to show you this slide because it's an awful thing. I just want it up there for a couple of seconds because when you talk about fantasy, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Where do these crazy thoughts come from? Where do these, and then we find the knife and the hammer that he has in these photographs. And these photographs come from his manifesto that he sent to NBC. By the way, I interviewed Cho's parents, his sister, and I went to New York City and went to NBC News, and I was allowed to read the entire manifesto, view all the photographs. I also went to the Virginia State Police and was able to read all of Cho's compositions. I'm happy to discuss those with you if you like. But I just want to show you the fantasy and the kind of a power that these kinds of fantasies have. And we're often talking about inadequate people and Harrison Klebold were not very popular in their school, and some people had said that they had been pushed around by the athletes, and they had at least a partial motive of vengeance, and perhaps a vengeance against all of the people. The same thing with Cho. Cho had not had any friends. He was considered a loner. He was diagnosed with selective mutism in his early years in elementary school and in middle school. By the time he came to school here, he had therapy for several years and was in a special education program and would not speak. We'll talk about that a little more as we go along. I'd like to put up a definition of fantasy for you. Fantasy isn't all wrong, bad, destructive, but we all fantasize. And most of our fantasies are in the domain of problem solving and daydreaming. And they're really more of a harmless thing, and perhaps even constructive. But there is a destructive kind of fantasy as well. And if we can go to the next one. Albert Einstein said that the thought is father to the action. And that's the way I like to express it. But first we think it, then we do it. The thoughts are there. And the more we think about it, the more we move in the direction of doing it. Whether it's a fantasy about a female, the more we think about it, the more perhaps we get the courage to approach. It's there. When I was a boy, let me tell you a little story about how fantasy may develop. When I was a little boy, I come from a family of 5 boys. I have 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. And I had an older brother who used to like to get me down and sit on my chest. And those of you who have older brothers probably understand what I'm talking about. Well, I used to sit on my chest, and he used to pin my arms to my side, you know. I was just a little guy, about 9 years old. He'd sit on my chest, pin my arms. I couldn't do anything. I'm laying there, you know, looking up at him, at his mercy. And then he would leer down at me. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he let saliva drip in my face. Well, I didn't like that. I didn't like it. And so I began to fantasize. I began to say, someday when I'm big enough, and I began to think about, what is it that he loves? Let me find it and destroy it. But in my life, I had an angel of justice, and she would suddenly appear, and she would have a broom frequently, and she'd whack him and knock him off, and I'd say, hooray! You know? So in my life, there was justice, and he didn't get away with it, at least not all the time. And he was caught with sufficient regularity that I understood there was such a thing as justice. But I would suggest to you that there are many young people who suffer abuse every day, far more serious than I ever suffered. And there are no angels of justice in their life, ever. And it just happens day in, day out. So those fantasies aren't arrested, they aren't stopped, they continue to grow often into dangerous fantasies. So as you can see, there are constructive fantasies and there are destructive fantasies, and destructive fantasies move on toward violence. I have a definition of violence here. I believe that if you're in law enforcement or if you're in the academic community, that you might want to put certain books in your library. This book, this definition comes from a book by John Monahan, who's a psychologist at the University of Virginia Law School. And he wrote a book called Predicting Violent Behavior. It's a good book to put in your library. This is his definition, and I think a definition is a good thing to have when you're talking about something. Fantasy, The next slide talks about the fact that it's verbal and nonverbal, that the verbal ones, maybe the fantasy may be expressed as a result of some triggering event, being dissed, as the kids say, somebody treating you with disrespect, and it bubbles up because when you're treated with disrespect, perhaps as a child, you develop these retaliatory fantasies. And then nonverbal, so body language, gestures, We all know that the person clenches a jaw and tightens a fist and does things like that. But if we go a little further, we see that there's a variety of behaviors that can attend fantasy, and we're not just talking about destructive fantasy, although we're talking about that as well. But to stare, expression, and on the road here tonight, a person expressed a little animosity toward me with a gesture. My wife is smiling. Posture, a person's posture, martial arts, big thing. Sometimes these people don't get very proficient with martial arts, but they get involved in it, and that's part of the fantasy. And we've known people who go into a martial arts stance when you start with them. You walk into a room and it's dark, and all of a sudden you start on and they immediately go into this karate stance. I wonder about those people. Recklessness, substance abuse. Substance abuse generally allows us to be free of the inhibitions which may stop us from doing antisocial things and violent things. You take drugs or alcohol and the inhibitions kind of melt away. A dress, tight or loose, exhibitionistic, camouflage. You see some of these people wearing camouflage. You go to a company picnic and this guy's wearing camouflage. I don't know. He thinks he's going to disappear into the woods, I guess. I don't know. Black trench coats, very popular now. A lot of the kids. See, the kids will mimic others. And so black trench coats, we see that. In fact, Northern Illinois University, right? That shooter had a trench coat. So these things are things that we ought to be alert to, and even if it's just a joke, nevertheless, it's a flag, and we should look for it. Appearance, hygiene, grooming, various kinds of markings, tattoos, they all communicate. All these things communicate to you. If you're a forensic behavioral scientist, you pick up on it. You look at people, and you look at these kinds of things, and see if they're trying to communicate something to you. And if they're trying to communicate something to you by a certain kind of tattoo or marking or colors, you ought to at least pick up on it. You're doing the favor that you're receiving the communication, but not the way that they might hope for. Interests, reading, viewing, music, interests, very important. We can talk about this further if you like. But you see, if you have a fantasy, if you have a destructive fantasy, a violent fantasy, you give that fantasy fuel. And the fuel is books and videos and things that complement that fantasy and help you to enlarge that fantasy. So the things that a person draws to themselves, the kind of music, the reading or the viewing of materials is also valuable. Fantasy also is expressed in one's possessions, so vehicles. Sometimes you'll see people will drive the kind of a vehicle that is expressive of a certain kind of fantasy. If a race car enthusiast, they'll have a car that looks like a race car sometimes. in the residence room for parents. You check out the kid's room, see what's on the walls. That tells you something about the fantasies going on. And by the way, every time I do one of these things, I have people come up to me and say, do you have a minute? And they say, my son is thinking some pretty dark thoughts. Good, great, please do. That's it, because that's where it begins for us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Weapons. I've heard people talk about weapons here on the stage. Let me tell you, I distinguish between certain kinds of weapons and others. Weapons that are designed to kill human beings. They accompany a different fantasy than a polychoke shotgun that you shoot birds with. So the kind of weapons the person has suggests certain kinds of fantasy. Now, I've had people say, well, what kind of weapons do you have, Raj? I said, well, I have a snuff-nosed revolver, a Smith & Wesson bodyguard with a hammer shroud, and I have a Glock, not a Glock, but a 6 Sauer 9mm with 15 rounds. And they say, well, what about you? And I said, well, I have fantasies about killing people. They said, what? I said, yeah, I have fantasies about killing people. I was a police officer, police chief, FBI agent. It's called behavioral rehearsal. In military service, you have to think about what if you're in the bank cashing a check and the guy next to you sticks up the bank. I mean, it'd be good if you thought about that ahead of time. Or if you have to go in after an active shooter, it'd be good if you rehearse that in your brain a little bit, just like Tiger Woods does when he's going to make one of his kind of latest putts. You think about what the mind in your brain. But, if you're a computer jockey, then what do you need that for? You need an AR-15 or AK-47. I'm not sure. And you open up his desk and you look in there, like we do in the business world, and you see some handcuffs. It's kind of doing with well, it's tied into some kind of fantasy, obviously. So badges, handcuffs, symbols of authority, those things are tied to fantasies, and sometimes they're dangerous fantasies. Any one of these things is only one flag. You never judge a person to make a conclusion on the basis of one flag. But that flag should get your attention, and then you look and you see if there are other indicators. If you start seeing other indicators, then you begin to make a conclusion. Hey, something's going on here. This person could be dangerous. Use of words and signs. We'll go on to the next one. Dangerous fantasies, homicidal ideation and suicidal ideation. Very important. Generally, people with these kinds of fantasies will betray them in their interactions with others if they're having interactions with others. Suicidal ideation, the same thing is true, and that's why looking to see if students are suicidal is very important. Depression, picking up on that. And especially in these kinds of situations, because in the workplace, in the public place, and in the school place, probably about 60% of the multiple victim shootings end in suicide. So suicidal ideation is important as well. Now we just run through a few red flags and warning signs, and then I'll sit down. Violent fantasy content, we've already talked about it somewhat. It can be in written compositions. Cho, for instance, wrote several very violent plays and other kinds of compositions and poems. One poem clearly suggesting that he had intense suicidal thoughts. When teachers see those things, they have to pick up on it. We'll talk about that a little bit. Anger problems, and anger can manifest itself verbally, or it can manifest itself as solitude. But expression sometimes gives it away. Threats, there are 4 kinds of threats. One is direct, I'm going to kill you. One is indirect, somebody's going to kill you. One is veiled. Don't come to school on Monday. One is conditional. If you don't do this, then I will kill you. If then, kind of thing. Fascination with weapons, we talked about, and accoutrements, and I mean by that knives, the difference between a pocket knife and a stiletto or a switchblade. Different fantasies accompany the person who has those different kinds of weapons. Brass knuckles. Boasting or practicing or fighting and combat proficiency, boasting. Loner is important. Cho is a loner. Many of these multiple victim killers are loners. So if a person is a loner, I don't say that we begin to suspect that person of anything. No, it's only one indicator, but it is an indicator. And the reason why it's important is because a loner does not get feedback, does not get someone to challenge his distorted thought processes, does not get reality checks from people because he doesn't have the interaction. So if I go home and I'm mad at somebody and I say, I ought to kill that guy. I have a wife and she'll say to me, Raj, don't talk like that. She says that to me frequently. She says, don't talk like that. That's not the kind of person you are. You're just angry. Don't portray yourself like this. It's unbecoming and all of that. Well, the owner goes home and says, I like to kill that guy. He doesn't hear any challenge. Suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, we talked about stalking, the next one. It begins perhaps with an infatuation and then becomes a love obsession and then move all the way to a serious mental condition called erotomania. Non-compliance and disciplinary problems. Harrison Klebold were exemplary of that. Cho also, he wore hat and sunglasses, weird sunglasses in class, would not take them off, or would not comply with rules. When he was told to rewrite one of his plays, he would not rewrite it. Imitation of other murders, interest in previous shooting incidents. As you know, Cho, when he was in middle school, had fantasies about killing everyone in his class, in the school. And Harrison Klebold were heroes to Cho in middle school. He was referred to therapists at that time, and he underwent therapy. But in his manifesto to NBC News, he referred to Eric and Dylan. He was on such close terms with Harrison Klebold that he referred to them by their first names. So the fantasy had advanced to that extent. Victim, a martyr, kind of a martyr self-concept. Certainly, most of these multiple victim shooters are experiencing that kind of thing. Feeling bullied or disrespected, strangeness and aberrant behavior, paranoia. You know, and the strangeness and aberrant behavior is very important because the other kids, the other students pick up on it. They say, hey, this is kind of weird. And maybe we should listen to that and realize that there's something there and take a little closer look and see what that means. Paranoia, as you know, everybody's against me. The next one, violence and cruelty. You see, these people often are cruel to animals and younger siblings, younger children perhaps. Inappropriate affect, they enjoy cruelty. They laugh at cruelty. They watch a movie and some extremely cruel thing is being done and they find it very funny, very humorous, very entertaining. What's going on there? Is it a front or is it or is it inappropriate in affect and perhaps even dangerous? Acting out demonstrations, police contact. As I said, Harrison, Clebo, Cho, both there was police contact. Cho talked about committing suicide. The police came, as you know. They brought in the community services board representative. She, in my opinion, correctly diagnosed him as being a danger to himself or others, and found a bed for him in the hospital. And so Cho went. So here we have the community services board, we have the police, we have a lot of people, mental health history. Both Cho and Harrison people have had mental health history. Had both all of them been in this national Northern Illinois University student once again had emotional problems, and so there's often a pattern here that. And sometimes people are afraid to ask, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about homicide? Those questions have to be asked in the psychotherapeutic climate, because sometimes they are. And sometimes people think, well, you may be planting the idea in their mind if you do that. Well, you're not. They have thought about this before. Expressionless face, anhedonia, which means inability to experience joy, pleasure, in certainly Cho and this Northern Illinois University, the expressionless face. Unusual interest in police, military, terrorist activities and materials, use of alcohol and drugs we've already talked about. So now let's just talk about lessons learned from just a minute. And let me say this, if we look at Columbine and look at Virginia Tech and we look at most of these other ones, we see that many of the agencies that have responsibility for safety and security in our schools become aware of these people. And it reminds me of the old story of a number of blind people in a room with an elephant, and everybody's feeling an elephant, and everybody just has a picture of what the elephant looks like, the total elephant, and no one has the entire picture. And that's basically what I see happening here. Now, it happened in Columbine, and then 8 years later, it happened again in Virginia Tech. And when are we going to learn? You know, when are we going to have the next slide? When are we going to have school records that are available? In Cho's situation, Virginia Tech never knew that Cho had fantasies about killing everybody in the school in his middle school years, that he had been in therapy for that kind of thing, and that he wanted to, quote unquote, commit a Columbine situation in his school. How I understand privacy and confidentiality, I worked with all my life, but shouldn't we have some kind of a vehicle where this kind of information, as critical as this is, as important as we know fantasy is, destructive fantasy, as important as that is, shouldn't there be a way that we can access that kind of information so that we can reduce the risk of something happening there? Teacher observations, we see that in Harrison Field, we see that in Cho, numerous observations, and teachers who are actually afraid of these students. They go up through the administrative channels in their school, and nothing seems to happen, you know, in many instances. And so a teacher's job is to communicate the course material, not to discipline or to give therapeutic counseling to a disturbed student. The teacher has to have someone to turn to, has to be able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, and that somebody has to be a person or a group who has responsibility for making the environment safe, making the schools safe. And that's the principal interest of such a group. Student or peer information. You know, someone like Lou Munoz is constantly getting information from the students. And that information should go to some group so that more closer look at some of these people can take place. Police reports, almost in all of these cases, you know, if the kid is a problem in school, he's often a problem for other authoritative institutions in our society. So, in these cases, the police had contact. Cho, on 3 occasions, was accused of stalking girls. You know, it may have been that he had no social skills, and he really couldn't. He didn't know how to approach a female. So he was scared of these girls. And again, contact with the police. So, you know, why aren't these people all talking to one another? Consular concerns, you know, the whole consular industry. You know, we have this thing called confidentiality and privacy. Well, Joan and I are involved in counseling and therapy, and we know that if a person expresses interest in hurting somebody or is abusing a child, that we are ethically bound to report that information. And how can we get access to information that is going to safeguard our communities, and especially some of our institutions where the members are more vulnerable? Mental health commitment evaluations, as you know, Cho was the commitment hearings in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But it's not only Virginia. I was chief of police in Michigan. It's the same way. You know, at a commitment hearing, you don't have people providing evidence, and you don't have witnesses, and it's not anything like a trial of an accused, you know, where you have people coming forth with witnesses. Generally, you have, in this case, the Community Services Board does a field diagnosis and sends Cho to the institution. At the institution, he's seen for, I think the psychologist said 15 minutes. And then the psychiatrist saw him in the morning. They made a recommendation, both of which made a recommendation that he was not a danger to himself or others. The judge independently took the middle ground, I guess. They did not talk with the judge, but the middle ground between what the Community Services Board representative said that he was a danger to himself or others, and the two psychologists and psychiatrists said that he was not. And so he said, well, he's a danger to himself, at least. And an outpatient commitment in which he was directed to get counseling, but no follow-up. So the commitment hearing itself, I mean, from my way of thinking, the police officers, the 3 cases of stalking, the threats, the Community Services Board representative who did the evaluation, all those people, you know, bring them together and let the judge really hear the facts. I mean, this is a strange guy. And, you know, on one occasion, he's visiting some people at a party, and the last time he was invited to a party. But you call that threat assessment team, and when you call them, you've got everybody on that team who has a role to safeguard that community, and it's kind of like the Virginia Tech review panel. Those are the kind of people we had on that team, and we had some arguments, we had some discussions, disagreements, some arguments. Nothing real serious, but I represent law enforcement. Although I'm a forensic behavioral scientist, my whole approach is safety, safeguarding the community. So I'll argue vigorously for it. You know? I'll say, let's get the information out there to a team where we can make decisions, which are going to safeguard our community. And that's my job. Well, Virginia Tech, the role of the police department, the mission of the police department was described in their emergency management plan. And it said this, it said, I'm paraphrasing, but it said, the role of the police department, Virginia Tech Police Department, which is a bona fide police department, sworn law enforcement officers who have gone through the same training that other officers for that area of Virginia go through. It said the role of the Virginia Tech Police Department is to support education, to support academics by, wait a minute. It's not the role of the law enforcement agency to support academics. I don't care if it's a university or what it is. It's the role of the law enforcement agency to maintain and to make sure that you have a safe environment for the people who conduct this. And don't water it down. If you want to say support academics, put it down there in number 5 or 6. But number 1 is to make sure that this is a safe environment. I could preach a little bit up here, but I'm going to resist that temptation because I've been up here too long as it is. But I want to say to you that there are some things we can do, but we have to work together to do it. And we have to make some changes in the institutions and in the whole area of coordination and cooperation so that we can get the information we need to make the decisions which are going to render our communities safe. Thank you very much.
Okay, now this will be the question and answer portion of the program. I'm going to give our PTA President, Jen Campbell, a mic, and she's going to walk around if anyone has a question. Question that they'd like to ask any of our panelists? The gentleman back there, Jen, to your right.
Thank you. Mark Overstreet. I have one brief comment, if I could, of the gentleman on the far right, and I'd like to ask the doctor a question. We were characterizing the legislation, sir. You referred to the one bill as a bars and guns bill, something to that effect.
Guns and bars. Guns and bars.
Actually, it's guns in restaurants, because everyone knows in Virginia we don't have bars per se. And I just want to just clarify that particular piece of legislation says that if a person is permitted to carry a gun, he can go into the restaurant provided he doesn't consume alcohol.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Doctor, we just think that, if you look at literature from the National Rifle Association, even they don't suggest that you put people with guns in places where there's alcohol.
Well, as long as you're not consuming the alcohol, I don't think that...
No, I think if you look at the NRA literature, it says guns and alcohol do not mix, and that's kind of the title of the information.
Well, I would disagree with you on that, but that's a little bit off the point. Doctor, my question is, could you comment on the fact that so many of these mass shooters killed themselves at the end of the incident, and perhaps distinguish, if it's relevant, between those instances where the perpetrator does this believing that he's about to be engaged by the law enforcement officer versus those occasions where he does it just because he's finished and he's going to be moving on?
Yeah, I think that they all plan to die at the end. It's just a matter of how many people they can take with them or kill before they have to take their own lives. It's very similar to assassins in our society. In many societies, most of the political assassinations of a president or someone like that are the work of political groups. In the United States, most of our assassinations have been the result of inadequate persons who have mental problems. And if you look at For instance, John W. Hinckley Jr., who tried to assassinate President Reagan. He took photographs of himself. You know, he had a photograph of himself taken in front of Ford's Theater. He had a photograph of himself taken in front of the White House. And an inadequate person like this wants to be somebody, wants to go down in history, you know, as somebody. These fantasies are to be the person who killed the great athlete or the great movie star or the president. And that way they become somebody. And so Hinckley wanted these photographs taken so that the history books would properly record his act and have pictures of him. You know, that's why I only show a couple of the photographs because you know, the same thing true of Cho. You know, Cho wanted the world to know why he was doing what he did, and he wrote a script for himself. And maybe you saw small parts of his manifesto on television the first few days after Virginia Tech. I remember calling friends of mine at meetings saying, "Get that stuff off the air." But nevertheless, he did that because he wanted the world to know. You know, he wanted to be somebody. And if you look at Cho, you see that he was very inadequate. He had changed his major from information technology to English, and he wrote all of these bizarre things. He got bad grades in some of those classes, and he was facing graduation. And what kind of a future does a mediocre English major have? For most of the students who were about to graduate, in my opinion, it was an exciting time for them to go out and use their newfound knowledge. Which, no, it wasn't bad. It was fearful. It's going to leave this environment and have to go out and mix with people. And that was very fearful for them. So my point is that in most of these situations, there's a fantasy life, and especially if there's examples of inadequacy in the person's background, then they're going to take themselves out of the game. That's what they intend to do. Does that answer? Yes, sir.
I have a question. Since Virginia Tech, I just wanted to know what has been done to empower the schools to do something about students like this? And if nothing's been done, what can we do to help the schools, both high school and college, authority figures to do something? I mean, I as a community member really can't do very much. So, but what can we do to help the schools become empowered and to help get information about this, the mental statuses of these people to gun sellers and disallow their violent arms, certainly ones used to kill humans?
Well, I'll respond, and then the other panel members can respond. But I would just like to say, first of all, that thank you for being here, and thank you for that attitude. That's exactly what we want. We want people like yourself who are asking that question, what can we do? And so let me address as far as my area of involvement is. As a member of the Virginia Tech review panel, I said to the governor invited us all to dinner at his mansion, and the last thing I said to him, for some reason he had me sit at his right hand. I don't think there was some kind of a mistake probably. Anyway, before he got away, I said to him, Governor, the people are going to want to know what's happened in the year or 5 years now. So why don't we at the anniversary of not the shooting, but the anniversary of the report, when the report came out, why don't we visit Virginia Tech and other institutions in the Commonwealth of Virginia and see if some of these holes have been closed, because there wasn't very much done at the higher time, unfortunately. And this time, we can't afford to just wait for the next one. We have to do something now. So what can you do? You can support. You can say, let's have some accountability. Every one of these review panels gives a report, but whoever follows up on it, who looks at it, you know, a number of years later and says, were these 92 recommendations followed in any way? God bless you. I wish you'd do that. Write a letter. It should be done. And by the way, we served pro bono on this, so I'm not looking for a job. We did not get any payment for that 4.5 months, and certainly we didn't want any payment. We wanted to do this for our Commonwealth and our communities. But I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting it and saying, okay, what have we done? The people want to know what you've done.
I would like to address that question as well. I think we have a huge missing piece here. The doctor's report is very complete in itself, but there's still a missing piece. And when we talk about a threat assessment team, and we're talking about the administration and human resources and the legal community and law enforcement, the missing piece is parents. And schools cannot tell, or they don't think they can tell, and pick up the phone and call the parents and say, there's a problem here. You know, I think there's at least on Virginia Tech's application, there's a line that said emergency contact. Well, it shows emergency contact was a question mark. If that wasn't a red flag. So I think the misunderstanding of privacy laws, and when it reaches certain proportions, like when Cho was arrested, the police or the school administration could have called his parents. Cho didn't even go in front of an honor council for his actions. So I think parent involvement is very important. Can high schools and parents tell the universities? Can the universities pick up the phone and say, I think we've got a problem here? Is there any history that we don't know about? All those opportunities were there. And nothing happened. So parent involvement, how about a waiver when your son or daughter goes to university? And the waiver is signed by mom and dad, mom and or dad, and the student. You can call mom and dad if I'm having a problem. It's as simple as that.
Oh, I forgot to say, when you asked the question, do you mind giving your name and community where you live? Sorry.
My name is Selma, and I'm Westfield Community Center. And this is not directed to anyone in specific, but one of the elementary things that we know when our kids are growing up and very young is that some seek negative feedback and negative attention because they don't get positive attention. It seems to me that they're feeding off each other. The media, well, it's important to cover it and to tell everybody what's happening, but in a way there's a lot of glamour in it for those that are looking for negative attention, because this is what they think they're going to be remembered in history, like you said. So, I mean, is it just my thoughts that the media is feeding this frenzy and that they're imitating each other? They're using what happened before to do something again? We didn't used to have this kind of violence in school, and it's not because we didn't have problems and our kids didn't have problems. And it's getting to be more common and more common. Anyone disagree with me?
I don't disagree with you, not at all. But I would say that there are a lot of people who would like to say that this is a result of these violent games video games and the amount of violence that's on television and all that kind of thing. In fact, we've had serial killers for many, many generations. Jack the Ripper had no television and no violent video games, but did have a fantasy of killing women. My opinion on that is that if you are entertaining dangerous fantasies, then the violent content in video games and in movies and whatever television programs, then it becomes fuel for your fantasy. I don't know which one comes first, but it seems to me that it really adversely affects people who already have these fantasies, and then it's used as fuel for the fantasy. But I'm like you. I think that much of what is happening in the media is unnecessary. That we really don't need to show the things that are being shown. I just read in a Sunday paper, our local Sunday paper, the fact that sexually explicit scenes in television has increased three times since 1989-1999, and that the use of foul language in television programs has increased 5.5 times in that 10-year period. I mean, you can't hardly watch a television program or a movie today that isn't just full of it. Violence, the incidence of violence has not increased, but the intensity of violence has increased. So that now, instead of the good guy shooting the bad guy and the bad guy goes down, now you see the bullet enter the guy's head and blood is squirted out. You know, so the intensity of the situation is far greater than it needs to be. So, and I think all of those things that's a dangerous trend. And once again, it's the woman in the back. If we don't like it, we ought to write letters and speak about it.
I'd like to respond to that as well. The other thing that we do here in this country that they don't do in other countries is we make the weapons available so that people can carry out those violent fantasies that we're talking about. And in fact, not far from here, twice a year, you can go to the Chantilly gun show. And if you walk in there, you see table after table after table of assault weapons. Okay, you see handguns too, but you see an awful lot of assault weapons. And so we make it easy for people to carry out these very violent fantasies. And one of the things that my organization does, and we ask you to think about, is do we need to make those weapons of mass destruction available to so many people, especially without backing each other?
My name is Carol McDougall. I'm a member of the Westfield community. I'm the parent of a son that went through Westfield and graduated and a current senior here at Westfield. And I have a comment and then a question. My comment is to the two dads that are up there. I think the true measure of character is how one handles oneself during difficult times. And the two of you and your families are an example of the highest level of character, and I applaud you. I guess there's a member of Aaron Peterson's family here as well. Thank you. The doctor mentioned that every school needs to have an emergency response plan. And my question is that an internal document, or is that something that is or should be distributed to both parents and students so that in the event of a crisis, we all know how to respond? You know, in school we do fire drills, and that's wonderful, but are we all well apprised in the event of a true emergency, what is the best way to respond and how to do that in an immediate sense?
Yes, I think it's predominantly an internal document at this time, has a lot of sensitive information in there. usually about how to control the function of the school from a structural standpoint. In other words, where the cutoffs of electricity and water and all of those kinds of things are. So some of those things you might not want in the hands of everyone. But I would say that I agree with Joe. I thought that Joe was right. And I will revise my slide, Joe, and I will include on there a member of the community. Of course, the mental health person on the threat assessment team. Of course, the mental health person and the lawyer are members of the community. But let's maybe just put a citizen like yourself on the threat assessment team. I think that would be an excellent addition. But as far as the emergency response plan is concerned, it probably has to be an internal document. However, in the formation of that document, there should be persons like yourself who have an interest, who can join in on putting that together. We really need people like you to get these things going. You know, we can put them together, we can orchestrate it, but I can assure you that if I called you and said your child was experiencing some problems here, and that from my 40 years of experience, I think that it may be harboring a dangerous fantasy, and I need to talk to you about it. I think I would communicate that to you in a different way than the vice principal or than the teacher would. Do you understand what I mean? I would say, look, this is serious business, and the lawyer would say, look, there are legal liabilities. And the mental health person would say, look, we have to have early intervention here. If this fantasy is allowed to continue, and everybody would make a contribution from their perspective, and the citizen then would be very valuable on that committee to say, I have a child in this school, and yes, I think that these kinds of things should be looked at more carefully than they have been in the past. Is that answer? Sure.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. Obviously, the actual plan itself is not something that should be disseminated widely, because otherwise, someone could get the answer of, oh, now that's what they're going to do. But part of the planning, of course, has to be that parents give their input in the first place, and then that the plan produces a document which can be disseminated to parents, which outlines what the school anticipates being able to cover and what they can't cover on their own, and also what they expect from parents, what they expect in the way of support, what they expect in time of a crisis. What we don't want every parent to jump into their SUV and drive to the school immediately, that kind of thing. And there needs to be an output from this plan, which is shared with parents, and it gives them some very definite pieces of advice, both in terms of looking for what behaviours, how to communicate it, who to communicate it to, and also in the event of hearing something, that you get something, you see something on TV or you get a phone call, what should you do at that time?
I guess during our journey after April 16, to answer a couple of questions here, Virginia Tech family is what we call ourselves, and that is a loose grouping of the families that have suffered from this tragedy, both victims and those that were wounded. And we are constantly monitoring the results of and the recommendations of the panel report. We have effective change, positive change. Mental health in Virginia this year will get somewhere between $40 and $50 million to help to plug holes that were there. Privacy and health and privacy laws are being looked at also by a commission headed up by Senator Janet Howell and Dr. Bonnie at the University of Virginia. Campus safety and security, again, is an issue that we are looking at intently, because we don't feel text messaging is enough. It's not sufficient. You need to have bells and whistles these days. And on a more practical note, if you read the Post today, the governor is ready to sign into legislation a bill that would require universities to develop an emergency plan and update it every 4 years. We would prefer every 2 years, but every 4 years. Establish a threat assessment team, which Dr. Depew went through, and create a system to notify students and employees of emergencies by email, phone, text messages, and other means. We don't know what the other means are, but we're working on that. We hope to at least make Virginia Tech a model campus of safety and security, the gold standard, and a model for the rest of the state and the rest of the nation, if that's possible. So those are practical things that are actually happening. We are monitoring them. We are advocating for them.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's up there tonight, parents as well as law enforcement and representatives. I am former law enforcement. I'm also an educator now for criminal justice. And I just have a question on your thoughts, I guess I want to hear, regarding, it's an organization called Students for Concealed Weapons Carry, and it's kind of a result of a lot of these shootings on the campuses. I think they have a big day coming up here at the end of March and or April, where the students will carry their holsters on campus, and they have representatives kind of stationed throughout the different colleges. I don't know about the high schools, but I just want to hear some thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me respond first. That's the other side of the fantasy. That's the hero fantasy. I brought along an article of, we don't have it quite easy to get to here, but that's the other side, and it's particularly a white male fantasy. You know, it's the Rambo, it's the guy who's going to come in there and, you know, the bad guy might get off a couple of shots, but he'll miss because he's the bad guy, and that's the way it works on TV and movies, and the good guy will shoot the bad guy. And I know there are gentlemen out here in the audience tonight that have that fantasy. They will be at the right place at the right time and do the right thing. The last time that I'm aware of that happened was in Seattle. There was a young man who had some mental problems. He had no problem getting an AK-47. He went to a mall and he shot up the mall. It was a concealed weapons purpose. And there, got his gun. They interviewed him from his hospital bed where he took 4 shots. He said there were people running and screaming in every different direction. And as soon as this guy saw he had a gun, he shot him. You know? So we don't think that fantasy, that hero fantasy, is particularly realistic. And we know there are young men out there that are anxious to be heroes, but we don't think it works. Reality doesn't work that way.
I might add one thing to that, and that is Chief Frencham from Virginia Tech. We were discussing what would happen if there were armed students, and he said, how is the active shooter team supposed to determine who the bad guy is? If they were to come into a room and there were several people with weapons in the room. So there are some complications there, certainly. And as a former chief of police, that would be something that I would be concerned about. Unless there was some kind of training program that would facilitate that. I don't see at the present time where that would be valuable and maybe a hindrance to effective law enforcement action in that kind of situation.
Just so sorry to add a little bit more on that. Are you guys going to do anything for that day? Have you had any training? I guess that's part of that question.
From colleges, this has no application to high schools.
There are a number of states which allow concealed carry on campus already. So one fortunate thing is we don't have any data to indicate that this would make the situation any better. I'm an engineer and I look at it from the situation of if you have 100 and some odd different buildings, each with so many different floors and so many different classrooms and different things going on in all of those at different hours of the day, how many guns would you need to have present? Just as a practical point of view, how many guns would have to be present to cover all of those locations at all of those times in a situation whereby one gunman could probably only cover 1 or 2 classrooms? Because if you have to go at any certain distance to arrive at the scene, then the campus police are doing the same thing at the same time. So you have to be able to stock enough weapons in enough hands, in enough locations, at enough times to be able to respond within a matter of 3 to 4 seconds or something like this, I've been told. So let's look at the numbers. You've got 33,000 students. How many of those students would have to be carrying weapons to cover this? Probably 1 in 10. So you would have to have, let's say, 3,000 students armed on the campus of Virginia Tech. If you have 3,000 students armed that are not normally armed, just by looking at the rates at which people who use weapons make mistakes, you're going to have a huge number of mistakes. You won't have 32 people die at one time, perhaps, but you might have 32 instances where 1 person dies. And so, yes, I would love, I'm a white male, I guess I entertain the fantasy of stepping up. I would have loved to have stepped up when my son was lying on the ground. I would have loved to have stepped in there somehow and taken hold of that kid and broken his neck. I wouldn't have had a gun because I don't want to carry one. But I would have loved to have been able to have broken his neck and stopped it. But I can't do that. I can't be there. I can't be there all the places. I've been told that if I'm worried about my son and my daughter and my wife and my mother-in-law, that the only thing I should do is go out and get a gun, and then I can protect them. Well, I don't go to my wife's office or my daughter's school or my son's college or where my mother-in-law lives. Yes, I can have a gun, and if anybody comes to my house at night, when they're there, I can protect them. For the majority of the time that they're in harm's way, I can't protect them. What we have to look at is, yes, it would be wonderful if somebody had stopped Cho at the minute he started. But what do we have to sacrifice to get to that position?
The other thing is, I think that we don't think about this, but college kids do sleep sometimes. And who has access to that weapon when the student is asleep? If they're in a dormitory room, in a fraternity, I mean, there are lots of other people that have access to their rooms. And not all of those people are trained or qualified, but we know young white American males are very interested in guns, okay? So I think that's an issue too on college campus. You know, you can carry a concealed weapon into the General Assembly building where there are usually 12 to 15 police officers at any one time. And many of our legislators, in fact, carry concealed guns. The first time a gun was fired was by a delegate who didn't run for re-election anymore, who was cleaning or doing something with his gun in his lap, and the gun went off. And the bullet went towards the central corridor of the building where lobbyists, the secretaries, all the aides are. Fortunately, it hit a protective vest that the police had given it, and that stopped the bullet. But lots of things that happen with guns in the hands of untrained people or people that just have this couple-hour course that they get, which I take periodically. And I'll tell you, they give you no legal training on when it's all right to kill somebody. Okay, they show you how to use the gun and shoot it a few times, and then they say, okay, go have some fun. Here, go get your concealed weapons permit. So you have a lot of people out there that have, are quote trained in carrying concealed weapons, have no idea when it's legal to use that thing, and have very, very, very limited training. We know from newspaper reports that the children of 3 concealed weapons permit holders have died because they picked up dad's gun and shot themselves. We know that the concealed weapons permit holders have murdered about 7 people in Virginia and 3 suicides, one on Route 66 going into Washington, going in rush hour traffic. This young man got in an argument with his girlfriend on his cell phone and picked up his handgun from his pickup truck and killed himself with it in rush hour traffic. And fortunately, the vehicle went into a Jersey wall and didn't hit any of the cars. But getting a lot of people out there is with carrying guns and not knowing when it's legal to use them is very dangerous.
I have a question. Mr. Sommer?
Could I just make one comment on that too? think there is another side. We see in aircraft now, pilots are arming themselves after Flight 93 occurred. I don't think we want to close the door on exploring some options. I think we might be able to do that. I'm not sure what they are. I'm also aware of the fact that there's some less than lethal means now that might be available. As Andrew mentioned, you certainly can't shoot in a crowded place with a lot of people running. And as soon as you take the weapon out, you're at a disadvantage. Every police officer knows that. The person you're pursuing can shoot indiscriminately, but you have to wait for an opportunity where no innocent person is at risk. But with a less than lethal kind of approach, you might be able to do something. And it's in the early stages of exploration, a taser type of thing where you could shoot. And the second thing, which is kind of like a peripheral issue that Andrew mentioned, what he would like to do had he been there, and I can certainly appreciate what he's saying. Perhaps we're overlooking the fact that people who are in those kinds of dangerous situations could respond. I mean, one of the options, it's certainly not the best option or the first option, but perhaps, I talked with my grandchildren about this. I have 3 grandchildren in college. And what would happen if a guy came in with a gun in your classroom and you just began to shoot people? I mean, are there some options there that we haven't explored? I mean, what about Flight 93? I mean, you know, those citizens got up and they went up there and they knew a certain death, but those terrorists were not going to fly that plane to Washington, D.C. and crash in Pennsylvania. Tremendously heroic acts, selfless acts. And perhaps some of the students at Virginia Tech that I interviewed who were National Guard students who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, it told me that chose the wrong classroom. They had been in combat, and even though they weren't armed, they would not, they would have done something, taken off their shoes in front of them, or whatever. And they would have done something. So maybe we ought to keep that in mind. That I'm not advocating that students take unreasonable risk, but I'm saying if there's nothing else, I'm a former Marine. If there's nothing else, I'm like Andrew. I'm going to try to take the guy down. If he gets me, at least I'll divert his attention, perhaps from some other people who then will be successful. Just thought.
I don't want to score any points or anything here, but you did bring up the thing about the airline pilots, and FAA did actually have a program to arm airline pilots. And one of the interesting things that came out about that is airline pilots are extremely responsible people, and it was thought that, that with that level of responsibility, you're responsible for so many lives. During 1 year period, 300 of their guns were lost. So just think about that. So responsibility, guns, it doesn't always work.
Edie, did you have a question? This will be the last one.
This is totally switching tracks. It's a personal thing I have about the Privacy Acts, and I wanted a little bit of clarification about how extensive those restrictions are on the universities, because from personal experience, well, when you were asking about soliciting information from all the various sources surrounding a particular individual, when you're not able to contact the parents because of a mental health situation on campus, you're closing the door to a lot of information. If I'm approached on the university campus and I can't call parents, You're not finding out about all the background and all the history and all the treatments that that child or that person has had. And most parents and students are not aware of these privacy acts until your kid goes to college, you can't get their grades, even though you're paying all that tuition. And then they realize, well, there's some issue there. And I'd like to see an opt-out provision as opposed to an opt-in provision. You're automatically included on all communications, particularly with mental health issues, unless you specifically say no. Because my daughter, it goes to a university, and they are aired on the other side. They will let parents know. And so I'm not sure how much room there is for interpretation, if it's a federal thing, if it's a state-by-state thing. I'd like a little clarification on that.
Yeah, the way I understand it, it is state by state. And there are states which consider young people to be dependents as long as their parents are paying for the educational experience. In other words, if they're declaring them on their tax return, then they're dependents no matter what their age is. And as long as they're dependents, the parents have a right to inquire as to their grades and other things. So that kind of thing is in existence.
Well, I'm talking about the reverse, because I've known several people whose children are in a precarious state trying to commit suicide, and the school was aware of that and did not contact the parents. And in this particular case at Virginia Tech, had somebody notified the parents, they would have been open to all that previous history information.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
It's like, I have to know the kids having trouble to call the school. I want the school to call me.
Yes, and I think that's a reasonable expectation, especially with a dependent child. No question about that. I agree with you.
So now the legislation that's for the, that you're supporting, what is that going to
It's a commission that's being formed to address these issues. It's not legislation been enacted, but been formed yet and presented yet.
The governor has made it very clear that he is going to ensure that at Virginia Tech and at all the other colleges, within Virginia at least, that there is proper education for people about HIPAA and FERPA. Because in the past it's been taken, well, we don't really understand the full extent of this, so let's make it cover everything and we won't say anything. And if you look at the laws, they do not preclude the contact of parents, especially in a situation where the child is a danger or the child is a danger to someone else. And at any time the colleges could have contacted the parents. But unfortunately there has been a culture of not talking to parents about anything. And to be perfectly honest, Virginia Tech still doesn't talk to me about a lot of things. And I find that very discouraging. Especially, I thought that they would be overreacting and telling me too much. But unfortunately, they haven't got the message even yet, as far as I can tell. But there is going to be a plan to make sure that people who have to administer these acts will understand. The court people have to know when should they send information to the criminal system for inclusion on the gun database. The school needs to know exactly when they can say something. And I think that they should err on the side of caution and go a little bit further. Maybe not, of course, tell you that they may not had it in a paper or something. No. But if they have gone to counselling because of threats of suicide or something like that, the most important resource for any child is their parents. Because who's the person that cares about them the most? It's the parents. And to leave them out of the loop is criminal.
I would encourage you to, I don't know if you've read the Virginia Tech panel report. It's, as I said, on the web, and I would encourage you to read it. There's a good discussion in there about HIPAA and FERPA and what's permitted and what isn't permitted, and it comes from a prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C., I think the largest law firm in Washington, D.C., who also work pro bono with us. And so the appendices for that report there's some excellent information that I think would be helpful for you.
All right, well, thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.